King Edward I and his Queen Eleanor of Castile welcomed Edward into the world in 1284 at Caernarvon Castle in Wales. Wales had been successfully brought under English rule and merged with England by Edward of Caernarvon, who was 16 years old at the time and was the first English prince to hold the throne of Wales. Anthony Beck, Bishop of Durham, gave the future king the manor of Eltham in 1305. During his reign, significant improvements were made at Eltham, including the building of a new retaining wall, where Edward frequently stayed. Later, he gave his Queen Isabella the manor. Hello and welcome to Hallmark History. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most fascinating and controversial monarchs in English history, Edward II. Edward II was a king who had it all. He was young, handsome, and charismatic, and he had the love and adoration of the English people. But as we'll see, his reign was also marked by great turmoil and conflict, with his relationship with his favorite, Piers Gaveston, causing tensions to boil over into open rebellion. But that's just the beginning of Edward's story. We'll also explore his tumultuous relationship with his wife, Queen Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, and the events that led to Edward's eventual downfall and imprisonment in Berkeley Castle. So if you're ready to delve into one of the most intriguing and dramatic periods of English history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join me for the rest of this captivating story. Edward was tall and strong, a fine figure of a handsome man, according to a contemporary. He was very passionate about outdoor pursuits, especially rowing, horse breeding, and greyhound breeding. He kept a camel at his Langley Palace and had a pet lion that he travelled to Scotland with. Edward loved music as well, especially the organ and the crwth, a Welsh stringed instrument. He was a passionate supporter of the arts, and in 1313, when Edward and Isabella were guests at the French court, 54 naked dancers entertained them. Piers Gaveston starts to show up in the prince's household records in 1300 when he was 15 years old and Edward was the prince. Gaveston, who was a household knight's son, became good friends with the two young people. Gaveston was exiled to France following a dispute in 1307 between Prince Edward and the king. The young Prince Edward showered him with gifts before he left, including 2 elegant outfits, 5 horses, swans, and herons. Along with 2 minstrels, he traveled to Dover with Gaveston. Although it is impossible to know their relationship's exact nature, there is compelling evidence that it was romantic. During that time, one chronicler wrote, "The son of the king immediately felt such love for him, Gaveston, that he entered into a covenant of constancy and destined himself with him before all other mortals with a bond of indissoluble love, firmly drawn up and fastened with a knot upon first seeing him." Christopher Marlowe seems to be urging the audience to read the relationship in his play Edward II as a homosexual one. When asked why he favors him, Edward calls Gaveston "my sweet Gaveston" and responds, "because he loves me more than all the world." The marriage of Edward and Isabella, the daughter of King Philip IV of France, was a calculated move to improve ties between France and England. The couple was crowned at Westminster Abbey in 1308, with Edward being 23 and Isabella being 13. As soon as Edward became king, he extended an invitation to Gaveston to return to England, and the first charter that was enacted during his reign gave Gaveston the earldom of Cornwall. In retrospect, this was a grave error. Gaveston was made Earl of Cornwall, and because of his unusually close relationship with the king, many chroniclers thought of him as a second king. The king and his subjects frequently engaged in combat as a result, which infuriated the influential earls. The future King Edward III's mother, the Queen, and Gaveston were compelled to flee the wrath of the earls in the north of England in 1312. The earls were able to isolate Gaveston at Scarborough Castle with careful planning, and they besieged the castle until they could come to an agreement on the conditions of his surrender. Gaveston was taken to Dedington Castle under the care of the Earl of Pembroke, where he was left unattended, after discussions between the king and the earls. It is unknown if Pembroke was aware of what transpired next. When the Earl of Warwick learned that Gaveston was so close by, he attacked the castle, captured Gaveston, and then, with the backing of the Earls of Lancaster, Hereford, and Arundel, had Gaveston tried and executed for treachery. On June 19, 1312, he was executed atop Blacklow Hill. Edward was left feeling ashamed and distraught. However, Edward did not improve upon his errors in managing his relationship with Piers Gaveston. Hugh Despencer the Younger, another of his favourites, was appointed royal chamberlain in 1318. Hugh was Edward's married nephew, and Edward lavished Hugh with praise and titles. Naturally, this infuriated the wealthy nobles once more, who saw Despencer as a threat to their own power and privilege. Despencer was once more referred to as a second king by chroniclers because of his apparent insatiable desire for power. Due to Queen Isabella's French ancestry and the deteriorating English-French relations at the time, Despencer did a number of things to aggravate her, the most humiliating and damaging of which was removing her children from her custody. Nevertheless, Edward's humiliating and isolating public displays of affection for Hugh Despencer continued to cause problems in the royal family. Isabella's patience had finally run out, so she fled to France to join forces with Roger Mortimer, a powerful English baron who became her lover and instigated a rebellion against Despencer. Isabella and her lover invaded England in September 1326. Finally, King Edward II and Despencer were cornered in the area of South Wales around Llantrisant. Afterward, Hugh Despencer was summarily executed by hanging, drawing, and quartering in Hereford before the king was transferred to Kenilworth Castle. Later, Edward, the king's 14-year-old son, was crowned Edward III in early 1327 with Mortimer as regent after the king had been forced to abdicate. In the meantime, the deposed monarch was taken to Berkeley Castle to be put to death. In April of 1327, Roger Mortimer, the regent, learned of plans to restore King Edward II, who had been deposed. He then had him transferred to a safer location. In the spring and summer of 1327, Mortimer had Edward relocated to different locations after hearing reports of new plots to free him. Fearing that one of the many plots would succeed, Mortimer ultimately decided to have Edward II assassinated to end the problem once and for all. The people who murdered Edward did not want any physical evidence of their actions. They looked down on the deposed king for being gay and overly effeminate. Holding him down, they thrust a red-hot poker up his rectum, scalding his internal organs. It has also been said that a tube was inserted into his rectum before a hot metal bolt was lowered through the tube and into his intestines. It has been said that Edward II's dying screams could be heard for miles. Until 1330, when Edward III turned 18, Isabella and Mortimer ruled in his name. Then, Edward III had Mortimer executed. After being accused of usurping the throne and other high crimes, Roger Mortimer was executed on November 29, 1330, by hanging at Tyburn and having his vast estates forfeited to the crown. For 2 days and nights, the public could see his dead body hanging from the gallows. Edward III had his mother put into exile. In a sick and twisted form of eternal punishment, Edward III had Isabella buried at London's Greyfriars Monastery with his father's heart draped around her neck after she passed away in 1358. During his subsequent 50-year reign, Edward III became one of the longest reigning medieval monarchs. He is remembered for starting hostilities with France that lasted 100 years. Edward II's harrowing experience demonstrates that making it through the political intrigue and plotting of the medieval English court was a remarkable accomplishment in and of itself. Even the most affluent nobles of the Middle Ages knew that an obsession with amassing wealth and power was bad for one's health. The curse of the downtrodden. The dramatic story of Edward II, a king whose reign was marked by both great promise and great tragedy. Edward's downfall was ultimately caused by a number of factors, including his controversial relationship with Piers Gaveston, his strained relationship with the nobility, and his own personal flaws as a leader. It is a powerful reminder that our actions have a profound impact on those around us and that the choices we make can have far-reaching consequences. So if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join me for more Hallmark history content. Until next time, take care and keep learning.